Welcome back to the channel everyone, and thank you for tuning in today because what you are about to hear sounds like pure fiction at first, but is rooted in the strange and fascinating world of numismatics where tiny details can turn pocket change into generational wealth. And today, we are diving deep into one of the most shocking stories ever whispered among collectors, investors, and treasure hunters alike. The unbelievable claim that a 1967 United States one-cent coin could be worth as much as $21 million, a value so extreme that it forces even seasoned experts to stop, question everything they know, and re-examine the overlooked copper coins that most people would never glance at twice. And this story is not about a single obvious mistake, but rather a perfect storm of rare errors, production anomalies, historical context, metal composition irregularities, undocumented mint mishaps, and hypothetical conditions that together create a coin that could theoretically command one of the highest prices ever imagined for a Lincoln cent. And to understand how something so ordinary could become so valuable, we must first travel back to 1967, a year when the United States Mint was under intense pressure due to a nationwide coin shortage. A shortage so severe that it altered minting practices in ways that would later open the door to some of the most mysterious and controversial errors ever produced. Because in 1967 the mint suspended mint marks entirely in an effort to discourage hoarding, meaning every cent struck that year appears anonymous, hiding its origin and making attribution far more complex. And during this period, quality control was stretched thin as demand skyrocketed. Machines ran longer hours, dies were used beyond their normal lifespan, and experimental practices were quietly employed without the rigid documentation collectors rely on today. And this chaotic environment is the fertile ground from which the legend of the $21,001,967 penny emerges. Because when you combine multiple extreme errors into a single surviving coin, you enter a realm where valuation becomes less about price guides and more about theoretical desirability, uniqueness, and the willingness of ultra-wealthy collectors to pay anything for something that literally cannot be replaced. And one of the most critical components in this valuation story begins with metal composition, because while 1967 cents were officially struck in a bronze alloy of approximately 95% copper with the remainder being zinc and tin, there are persistent claims supported by metallurgical testing that a tiny number of cents from this era were struck on experimental planchets, including transitional alloys, foreign blanks, or even test compositions never intended for circulation. And if a genuine 1967 cent were proven to be struck on a solid copper planchet of a purity inconsistent with official records, or on a planchet intended for another denomination or another country altogether, its value would immediately leap into a category reserved for once-in-a-lifetime discoveries, and the rarity multiplier grows even further when you consider off-metal strikes, such as a cent struck on a silver planchet, a brass alloy meant for foreign coinage, or even a planchet with an unusual density profile that cannot be replicated. Because collectors are not merely buying a coin in these cases, but purchasing a documented failure of the minting system itself. And then, there are striking errors, which form the second major pillar of this valuation mythos. Because a normal off-center strike or minor die crack might add a few $100s to a coin's value, but a perfect storm error like a double struck, rotated, broad struck, off metal, and misaligned die strike occurring simultaneously would be unprecedented. And if such a coin also displayed a dramatic double die obverse with strong doubling visible to the naked eye on Lincoln's profile, the date, and inscriptions, the desirability would multiply exponentially, especially if the doubling matched none of the known die varieties cataloged for that year, effectively creating a brand new classification that would force grading services and reference books to rewrite history. And speaking of doubling, the possibility of a 1967 cent exhibiting a previously unknown Class 1 doubled die with extreme separation is particularly tantalizing because 1967 is not traditionally associated with famous doubled dies, making any dramatic example from that year instantly suspicious, controversial, and therefore immensely valuable if authenticated. And authentication itself is another crucial element in this story because the hypothetical $21 million coin would need to survive scrutiny from the most respected grading services in the world, undergo metallurgical analysis, die state comparison, and provenance verification, and still emerge as a legitimate mint error rather than post-mint damage, which is no small feat. But if it did, the narrative value alone would send shockwaves through the collector community, and provenance is where things become even more intriguing, because the idea that such a coin could have sat unnoticed for decades in a jar, a drawer, or an inherited collection adds a powerful emotional component that wealthy collectors are known to pay premiums for. And if the coin could be traced back to an original source, such as a former mint employee, a closed factory hoard, or a documented estate connected to the minting process during the 1960s, the story would elevate from curiosity to legend. And legends are what fuel 7- and 8-figure prices in niche collecting markets. And then there is the question of condition, because errors alone do not guarantee astronomical value unless the coin is preserved in an exceptional state. And a 1967 cent exhibiting all these anomalies, while also retaining near pristine surfaces, minimal circulation wear, strong luster, and sharp detail would be virtually unheard of, because most extreme errors are caught late in the striking process and show heavy damage. So the survival of a high-grade example would suggest it was pulled almost immediately, further reinforcing the idea that someone recognized its significance even if they did not fully understand it. And another layer of intrigue comes from die varieties and hub anomalies, because during the 1960s, the mint was transitioning hubbing techniques, and mistakes during hub creation could result in subtle yet profound differences in design elements, spacing, and relief. And if a 1967 cent were discovered with a hub variety that does not match any known master hub or working hub for that year, it would suggest an undocumented or experimental hub was used, something that would rewrite part of minting history and become priceless to institutional collectors and museums. And speaking of institutions, the theoretical $21 million valuation often assumes competition between private collectors and public institutions, because when museums, foundations, and ultra-high net worth individuals all want the same singular object, price becomes almost irrelevant. And history has shown time and again that unique numismatic items can shatter expectations when two determined bidders refuse to lose. And beyond physical characteristics, there is also the psychological factor, because the Lincoln cent is one of the most widely collected coins in American history, meaning any discovery that elevates a common date into legendary status captures global attention, mainstream media coverage, and viral fascination. And that exposure alone can inflate perceived value far beyond traditional metrics, turning a coin into a cultural artifact rather than a mere collectible. And this is where speculative valuations like $21 million are born, not from price guides or auction records, but from the convergence of uniqueness, narrative, desire, and the human obsession with rarity. And critics are quick to point out that no confirmed public sale has ever reached such a figure for a 1967 cent. And that is true, but private sales, undisclosed transactions, and theoretical valuations are a different arena altogether, especially when dealing with coins that may never be offered publicly at all, because the owner understands that once sold the story ends, while holding it preserves the mystique. And the final piece of this puzzle lies in the realm of possibility rather than certainty, because numismatics is full of discoveries that were once deemed impossible until they were pulled from circulation decades later, authenticated, and celebrated. And every time that happens, it reinforces the belief that there are still treasures hiding in plain sight. And that belief alone fuels the idea that somewhere out there exists a 1967 1-cent coin so riddled with extraordinary errors, anomalies, and historical significance that its value transcends logic and enters the realm of legend. And whether or not such a coin ever changes hands for $21 million is almost secondary to the fact that the possibility itself keeps collectors searching, examining, and dreaming, turning an ordinary copper penny into a symbol of hope, curiosity, and the thrilling reminder that history sometimes slips through the cracks of quality control and lands quietly in the palm of an unsuspecting person, waiting for the moment when its true worth is finally understood.